Good evening, night wanderers, and welcome to Nachtmare Witness. Here, true and forgotten stories step out of the shadows, told in a calm voice to help you relax, clear your mind, and slowly drift into sleep. Before we begin tonight's journey, tell me where you are listening from. Leave your city or country in the comments below. It is always wonderful to see how far these stories travel through the night. You may hear a few short ads near the beginning of the video. After that, there will be no more interruptions, only the quiet darkness, the gentle sound of my voice, and the strange stories waiting ahead. So, lower the lights, get comfortable, and allow the world around you to slowly disappear. And if you enjoy peaceful nights filled with true fear, mystery, and unexplained events, please like the video, subscribe to Nachtmare Witness, and turn on notifications. Now close your eyes, take a slow breath, and listen carefully. Tonight, the darkness has something to tell you. During the final 4 years of high school, I went through a period of extreme nightmares that slowly took over almost every part of my life. When I say nightmares, I do not mean the usual kind where something chases you through a dark building or you wake after falling from a great height. These dreams were violent, graphic, and emotionally cruel. They involved blood, death, and people I loved being hurt or killed in front of me. They happened almost every night. The dreams were so vivid that many of them are still clear in my memory years later. I can remember scenes from them the same way I remember real events from school or home. I remember places, faces, sounds, and the feeling of being trapped inside the dream while terrible things happened around me. Sometimes the dream would begin in a familiar place. I might be at home, at school, or somewhere I recognized. Everything would feel normal for a while. Then, something would change. A person I loved would disappear. Someone would become injured. A room would turn into a place filled with violence. The dream would become more graphic and disturbing until I woke in complete panic. Other times, the nightmare began badly from the first moment. There was no peaceful beginning and no warning that the dream was changing. I would already be standing in the middle of something horrifying, unable to understand how I had arrived there or how to leave. The worst dreams involved people close to me. Seeing a stranger die in a dream would have been frightening enough. Watching a parent, friend, or another person I cared about suffer was much worse. Dreams do not always allow you to look away. In real life, if something becomes too disturbing, you can close your eyes, leave the room, or ask someone for help. Inside a nightmare, you often have no control. You may try to run, but your body refuses to move. You may try to scream, but no sound comes out. You may know that something terrible is about to happen and still be forced to watch it. That helplessness stayed with me after I woke. I knew the people in the dream were safe in reality, but the emotional reaction did not disappear immediately. My body still believed I had witnessed something real. My heart would race. I would sweat. Sometimes I would cry. I might need to check my phone or walk through the house to make sure the person I had seen die in the dream was still alive. If everyone was asleep, I could not always speak to them. I had to look at a closed bedroom door and tell myself they were safe behind it. Then, I would return to my room and face the possibility of falling asleep again. That became the real problem. At first, the nightmares were only frightening while they happened. Eventually, the fear began before I went to bed. As evening approached, I would start thinking about what I might see that night. I knew that closing my eyes could place me inside another violent dream. Sleep stopped feeling like rest. It became something I had to survive. During the day, I might promise myself I would try again. I would tell myself the next night could be different. Perhaps I would have a normal dream. Maybe I would not remember anything. Then bedtime came, the room became quiet, and all the confidence disappeared. I would lie in bed, listening to every sound. The darkness made the memories of earlier nightmares return. Scenes I had tried not to think about during the day became clearer when there was nothing else to distract me. I would remember a person screaming. I would remember blood. I would remember the expression on the face of someone I loved while something terrible happened to them. Even before falling asleep, I was already trapped in the previous dreams. The nightmares happened so consistently that I began trying to avoid sleep altogether. At first, I only stayed awake a little later. I watched videos, used my phone, listened to music, or did anything that kept my mind active. I told myself I was not tired yet. Then midnight passed. 1 in the morning passed. I would still be awake, even though I had school the next day. Eventually, exhaustion would overpower the fear, and I would fall asleep for a short time. Then another nightmare would wake me. After enough nights like that, I began sleeping less and less. There was a period when I felt as though I was barely sleeping at all. I might close my eyes for a short time, wake frightened, and remain awake for the rest of the night. The next day, I would go to school exhausted. My eyes burned. My head felt heavy. Concentrating became difficult. I could sit in a classroom and hear a teacher speaking without understanding the words. I would look at the page in front of me and realize I had read the same sentence several times. Simple tasks required more effort. My memory became unreliable. I forgot things people told me. I lost track of assignments. Conversations moved too quickly for my tired mind. People may have thought I was distracted, lazy, or uninterested. The truth was that I had spent the night fighting sleep because sleep had become terrifying. Eventually, I became dependent on a friend to help me fall asleep. We would use FaceTime and talk late into the night. The subject of the conversation did not always matter. Sometimes we discussed school, other people, music, or random things that had happened during the day. What mattered was hearing another human voice. When my friend was on the screen, I did not feel completely alone with my thoughts. The sound of someone speaking kept the nightmare memories farther away. It gave my mind something safe and ordinary to follow. I would lie in bed with the phone nearby and listen until exhaustion finally took over. Sometimes I fell asleep while my friend was still talking. That became the only reliable way I could do it. I knew it was not a fair situation for my friend. They had their own life, their own responsibilities, and their own need for sleep. But I had become desperate. The moment the call ended, fear returned. The silence of the room became too large. I worried that if I closed my eyes without another person present, I would immediately enter another nightmare. The calls became a form of protection. My friend could not control what I dreamed, but their voice helped me cross the point between waking and sleep. I became dependent on that comfort. If they could not call one night, I felt panicked before I even went to bed. I would send messages asking whether they were available. I hated needing someone that much, but I did not know what else to do. I tried many ways to calm myself. I tried relaxing before bed. I listened to peaceful music. I tried controlling my breathing. I tried making the room more comfortable. I avoided frightening films and disturbing stories. I attempted to fill my mind with harmless images before sleeping. None of it stopped the nightmares. Sometimes I went to bed feeling calmer and still woke from something graphic. That made the relaxation techniques feel useless. I began believing the dreams would come no matter what I did. I also tried medication that was supposed to reduce anxiety. I hoped that if my body became calmer, the dreams might become less intense. Maybe the medication would make it easier to fall asleep or stop me from waking in panic. It did not solve the problem. Perhaps it helped slightly on some nights, but the nightmares continued. I was still afraid. I was still exhausted. I was still depending on my friend to talk until I fell asleep. When normal explanations and methods did not help, I became willing to consider stranger possibilities. I consulted an online group interested in supernatural subjects. At that point, I did not know what else to think. The nightmares were so vivid and repeated so often that part of me wondered whether there was something more behind them. Maybe there was a meaning I had not understood. Perhaps something was affecting the house or me. People in supernatural groups often have many explanations for disturbing dreams. They may talk about spirits, negative energy, warnings, curses, or other things that are impossible to prove. When you are exhausted and frightened, even an unusual explanation can feel worth exploring. I listened to suggestions. I may have tried different routines, objects, prayers, or ways of protecting the room. Nothing helped. The nightmares kept coming. Looking back now, I think reaching out to that group showed how desperate I had become. I was not searching for entertainment. I wanted someone to tell me why this was happening and how to make it stop. I would have accepted almost any answer if it gave me a way to sleep safely. There was also another frightening effect from the lack of sleep. I began seeing strange things. At the time, I did not know whether they were connected to the nightmares, something supernatural, or something else. Now, when I think back, I believe some of those experiences may have been hallucinations caused by severe exhaustion. I cannot be certain. I remember seeing movements that disappeared when I looked directly at them. A shadow might cross part of the room even though nobody was there. Something in the corner of my vision would seem to move. Objects could look like people for a second before returning to their real shape. I may have heard sounds that did not have an obvious source. When the body goes without enough sleep, the border between waking and dreaming can become less stable. At the time, however, I did not have a clear explanation. The strange sights made me even more afraid to sleep, but staying awake probably made them worse. It became a cycle. The nightmares made me avoid sleep. Avoiding sleep left me exhausted. Exhaustion made reality feel less reliable. The strange experiences frightened me. That fear made sleeping even harder. I felt trapped in something I could not control. High school continued around me. Other students worried about grades, friendships, relationships, sports, and plans for the future. I had those concerns too, but underneath all of them was the problem of sleep. Every day was shaped by the night before. If I had managed to sleep for a few hours, I might function slightly better. If the nightmares had been especially violent, the images followed me through the day. I could be sitting with friends and suddenly remember part of a dream. Someone I loved might be speaking to me while I silently remembered watching them die the night before. They had no idea. The dream was not real, so I felt strange bringing it up. How do you tell someone, "I watched something horrible happen to you last night, and now I cannot stop seeing it"? They might laugh because dreams are not real. They might become uncomfortable. They might tell me to forget about it. I knew it had not happened, but my nervous system did not care. The emotional memory stayed. Sometimes I worried the dreams were predictions. I did not truly believe every nightmare would happen, but repeated dreams about death can create irrational fear. If someone did not answer a message, I wondered whether they were safe. If a family member was late coming home, images from the nightmares returned. The dreams had shown me so many ways people could die that ordinary delays and accidents became frightening. A nightmare could take a small fear and expand it into something graphic. Then the next day, that fear remained ready to attach itself to real life. I became tired in every possible way. My body was tired from not sleeping. My mind was tired from remembering the dreams. My emotions were tired from being afraid every night. Even trying to solve the problem became exhausting. Each new technique created hope. Maybe tonight will be different. Then the nightmare returned, and the hope disappeared. Eventually, I stopped expecting anything to help. I only tried to make it through one night at a time. I do not know exactly why the nightmares finally stopped. Around 3 years ago, the dreams disappeared. Not only the nightmares, all dreams seemed to stop. I would close my eyes at night and then wake the next day with nothing in between. There were no images, no stories, and no memories of sleep. It felt as though someone had turned off a screen. After years of graphic nightmares, the emptiness was a relief. I no longer woke with violent scenes in my head. I no longer needed to check whether people were alive because of something I had dreamed. I could go to bed without knowing for certain that I would be emotionally attacked by my own mind. But the complete absence of dreams was also strange. Most people probably dream without remembering it, so it is possible I continued dreaming and simply stopped forming memories of it. From my point of view, however, there was nothing. I closed my eyes. Time disappeared. Then it was morning. There was no transition, no dream world, no nightmare, only blankness. After everything I had been through, I accepted the blankness. It was better than blood, death, screaming, and fear. It was better than waking in panic. The nightmares had stopped, and that was what mattered. My relationship with sleep did not return completely to normal. Even after the dreams ended, my body seemed to have learned strange limits. To this day, if I sleep for more than around 5 hours, I often wake feeling terrible. Longer sleep does not necessarily leave me rested. It can make me feel heavy, weak, or mentally unwell. That seems backward because most people are told they need more sleep, not less. I do not fully understand why my body reacts that way. Maybe my sleep quality is poor. Perhaps my old habits changed my internal schedule. It could be connected to anxiety or something else. I cannot confidently explain it. I only know what I experience. Sleeping longer can make me feel worse. That has made it difficult to build a normal sleep pattern. Even during the years without nightmares, sleep never became something simple. I was no longer terrified every night, but I still did not trust it completely. A little more than a year ago, I began dreaming again. At first, it happened rarely. I might remember one dream every few months. The dreams were not always nightmares. Sometimes they were only strange or ordinary. Waking with a dream memory after years of blank sleep felt unusual. Part of me was interested. Maybe my mind was returning to something normal. Perhaps the period without dreams was ending. Because the dreams were rare, I did not immediately become frightened. I could remember one, think about it, and continue with my day. Then the dreams began becoming darker. Recently, I have started having nightmares again. They are not yet happening every night the way they did during high school, but their return frightens me. Each nightmare feels like a warning that the old period could begin again. One bad dream is not only one bad dream to me, it carries the memory of years. I wake and immediately think about what may happen the next night. Then I think about the night after that. I remember avoiding sleep, depending on calls, barely functioning, and seeing strange things from exhaustion. The fear is not only about the content of the current nightmare, it is about the possibility of another streak. I do not know whether I could handle going through that again. The first time, I survived because I was younger, because my friend helped me, and because I kept hoping the problem would eventually end. Now I know how bad it can become. That knowledge makes the return more frightening. Before the original nightmare period, sleep was normal. I had no reason to fear it. When the dreams started, I did not know they would continue for years. Now every nightmare comes with history. It says, "Remember what happened last time?" I do remember. I remember lying awake even though my body was exhausted. I remember needing someone to speak until I lost consciousness. I remember being unable to focus during the day. I remember trying medication and relaxation. I remember asking strangers online whether something supernatural was happening. I remember the shadows and strange sights that may have come from sleep deprivation. I remember feeling as though there was no safe part of the day because nighttime brought nightmares and daytime brought exhaustion. I do not want to return to that life. I do not want bedtime to become a threat again. The phrase "afraid to sleep" can sound dramatic to someone who has never experienced repeated nightmares. Most people look forward to bed when they are tired. Sleep is supposed to be the place where the body repairs itself and the mind rests. For me, during those years, sleep became the place where my mind created the worst things it could imagine. The people I loved were used against me. The more I cared about someone, the more painful the nightmare could become. There was no safe subject. Even happy memories could be changed into something violent. That is why simple advice often felt useless. Think positive thoughts. Relax. Remember, it is only a dream. I knew it was only a dream after waking. While it happened, it felt real. The body does not calmly wait for the dream to end. It reacts. The terror is real. The grief is real. The helplessness is real. Then you wake and discover that nothing happened, but the emotions remain inside you. Repeated every night, that becomes exhausting. I sometimes wonder whether my brain stopped producing memorable dreams as a form of protection. I cannot prove that. Maybe it was random, perhaps changes in stress, sleep patterns, medication, age, or some other factor caused it. But emotionally, it felt as though my mind finally shut the door. No more images, no more stories, no more people dying. Only darkness, then morning. Now that dreams are returning, I feel as though that door is opening again. I do not know what will come through it. Maybe the nightmares will remain occasional. Most people have a bad dream sometimes. One nightmare every few months would be unpleasant, but manageable. The problem is that I cannot look at them as isolated events. I keep waiting for the pattern to return. 2 nightmares close together feel like the beginning. 3 make me afraid to go to bed. The fear itself can make sleep more difficult, and poor sleep can make dreams more intense. I can see the possibility of the old cycle rebuilding. That is what I am afraid of. I do not want to depend on another person every night again. I do not want to feel ashamed because I need someone on the phone to fall asleep. I do not want to lie awake until morning while knowing I have responsibilities the next day. I do not want to become so tired that I question what I am seeing. Most of all, I do not want to spend every evening counting the hours until I have to close my eyes. There is a special helplessness in being afraid of something the body requires. You can avoid a dangerous road. You can stay away from a frightening person. You can stop watching disturbing films. You cannot permanently avoid sleep. The body eventually takes it from you. No matter how afraid you are, exhaustion will win. That means the thing you fear is unavoidable. During high school, I often stayed awake as long as possible, but I always knew I would eventually lose control. My eyes would close. My thoughts would become less clear. Then, the nightmare could begin. Waiting for that moment was sometimes worse than the dream itself. I am worried I may be moving toward that place again. The recent nightmares have not yet reached the same level, but I recognize the fear developing around them. I notice myself thinking about sleep earlier in the day. I remember the nightmare in detail. I wonder what tonight will bring. The old habit of watching for danger is returning. Part of me wants to believe the past will not repeat itself. I am no longer the same person I was in high school. My life is different. I understand more about anxiety, exhaustion, and the way sleep can affect the mind. I know that the strange things I saw may have come from not resting rather than anything supernatural. I know that one nightmare does not guarantee another. Still, knowledge does not always stop fear. I knew the dreams were not real before. That did not make them harmless. The most difficult part is remembering how completely exhausted I became. There is a point where tiredness changes everything. Your emotions become harder to control. Small problems feel impossible. The mind becomes foggy. You may see or hear things incorrectly. The world loses stability. I came close to that point during high school and perhaps crossed it several times. I do not want to reach it again. When I think about those years, I also feel grateful toward the friend who stayed on FaceTime with me. They may not have understood how important those calls were. To them, we may have simply been talking late at night. To me, their voice was the only safe bridge into sleep. I could focus on a real person instead of the images waiting in my mind. I could hear that someone was there. If I woke frightened, the phone might still be nearby. That small connection helped me survive many nights. I do not know what I would have done without it. At the same time, I do not want my safety to depend on someone else sacrificing their sleep again. That is too much pressure for any friendship. The nightmares were inside my mind, but they affected another person's routine because I could not face them alone. That is another reason I am afraid of a new streak. It would not remain only my problem. It could spread into my relationships, work, health, and daily life. I wish I could identify one clear cause. If the nightmares came from a particular film, I could avoid it. If they came from one medication, I could speak with a professional about changing it. If they followed one stressful event, I could work on that event. Instead, they seemed to exist without a simple reason. That made them feel powerful. I tried many things and nothing stopped them. Then they disappeared without explaining why. Now they are returning without explanation. The lack of control is almost as frightening as the content. I do not know whether the next dream will be ordinary or violent. I do not know whether I will remember it. I do not know whether this is a short period or the beginning of years. Every night becomes a question. The old nightmares taught me that the mind can create images more disturbing than anything I would willingly watch. It knows exactly what matters to me. It knows which people I cannot bear to lose. It knows what kinds of suffering frighten me. In the nightmare, all of that becomes material. There is no protective distance. I am not watching actors in a film. The people have the faces and voices of those I love. That is why the dreams remained in my memory. They attached themselves to real relationships. Even years later, I can remember scenes that never happened. The fact that they were unreal does not erase them from memory. They exist beside real events, clearly marked as dreams but still emotionally heavy. Sometimes I wish I could forget them completely. Most dreams fade within minutes. Mine stayed. Perhaps the intensity made the brain record them more strongly. Maybe waking in panic fixed them in place. Whatever the reason, I still carry images from high school that I never asked to see. The return of nightmares threatens to add more. That is what I mean when I say I am not sure I can handle another streak. I am not only afraid of being frightened in the night. I am afraid of collecting more memories, more deaths that never happened, more blood that was never real, more mornings where I have to look at someone I love while remembering their dream version dying, more hours lost to fear, more days lived in exhaustion. I do not want sleep to become an enemy again. For several years, I had the strange relief of closing my eyes and waking with nothing in between. Some people might find dreamless sleep empty. To me, it was peace. No matter how tired or strange I felt after sleeping, at least I was not waking from another violent scene. Then the dreams began returning, one every few months. Now the nightmares are appearing more often. I do not know what happens next. Maybe they will stop again. Perhaps this is only a temporary increase caused by stress or changes in sleep. Maybe they will remain occasional and never become the nightly terror they once were. I hope so. But hope is difficult when I remember the past so clearly. The fear begins before there is enough evidence. That is what anxiety does. It takes one sign and builds the worst possible future around it. One nightmare becomes every nightmare. One bad night becomes 4 years of high school. One moment of waking fear becomes a life where I cannot sleep without another person on the phone. I try to remind myself that the future has not happened yet. The old pattern does not have to return exactly as it was. Still, when night comes and the room becomes quiet, those reminders feel less powerful. I lie down and wonder what my mind will show me. I wonder whether I will wake in panic. I wonder whether the people I love will appear in another violent dream. I wonder whether I will begin avoiding sleep again. That fear is already part of the problem. I do not want it to grow. During high school, the nightmares made me feel isolated because they happened in a place nobody else could enter. Even when I explained them, nobody could fully see what I had seen. They could offer comfort, but they could not remove the images. Every night, I crossed into that world alone. My friend's voice helped me reach sleep, but once the dream began, I was by myself. That loneliness is another thing I remember. A nightmare can fill a room with people and still leave the dreamer completely alone. No one in the dream can truly help, because they are all part of the same mind creating the danger. The only escape is waking. Sometimes I woke quickly. Other times the nightmare seemed to last for hours. Dream time is difficult to measure. A few real minutes can contain a long story. That made sleep feel dangerous because I never knew how long I would be trapped. I could not control when I woke. I could not decide the dream had gone too far. I only endured it until my body released me. Then I opened my eyes in my room, exhausted before the day had even begun. It is hard to explain how deeply repeated nightmares can affect someone who has not experienced them. They are not only frightening pictures, they change behavior. They change the relationship with bedtime. They make darkness feel like a warning. They create fear of being tired because tiredness means losing control. They follow you into the day through memory. They can make real people feel connected to unreal deaths. They can turn sleep, one of the most basic human needs, into something you try to avoid. That was my life for years. Then, unexpectedly, it stopped. For 3 years, there was almost nothing. I could close my eyes and disappear into blank sleep. The silence felt like recovery. Now the dreams are returning. I do not know whether the silence is ending permanently or whether this is only a brief disturbance. I know only that the nightmares are becoming more frequent and the old fear is waking with them. I do not want to return to the point where I am afraid every evening. I do not want to become dependent on someone to talk me into unconsciousness. I do not want to spend my days barely functioning. I do not want exhaustion to make me see things again. I have already lived through that once. The first time, I did not know whether it would ever end. Now I know it can end, because it did. But I also know it can last for years. That knowledge cuts both ways. It gives me hope and fear at the same time. Maybe the nightmares will stop. Maybe I will return to dreamless sleep. Maybe I will eventually have ordinary dreams that fade by breakfast. Or maybe this is the beginning of another long period. I cannot know yet. That uncertainty follows me to bed. The nightmares themselves are frightening, but the real terror is the possibility of becoming afraid to sleep again. I remember exactly what that life felt like. I remember lying awake while my body begged for rest. I remember watching the hours pass. I remember waiting for my friend to call. I remember finally closing my eyes only because exhaustion became stronger than fear. I remember waking from scenes of gore and death. I remember going to school with those scenes still in my mind. I remember barely functioning. I remember seeing strange things and wondering whether I was losing touch with reality. I remember trying everything I could think of and finding no relief. Then I remember the dreams stopping. For years there was only darkness and mourning. That blank space became one of the safest places I had ever known. Now there are images again. For the moment they come only sometimes. One every few months became a little more often. Some are only dreams. Some are nightmares. Each bad one brings the old years closer. I wake, look around my room, and remind myself that I am here. The people I love are alive. Nothing in the dream happened. The day is real. But later, when evening arrives, I know I will have to close my eyes again. That is the part I am struggling with. I do not want another 4 years of fear. I do not want the night to become something I have to survive. I only want to sleep without wondering what my own mind is waiting to show me. A man was murdered in aisle 8, in the freezer section of the grocery store where I worked. The part that stayed with me most was the timing. It happened about 2 minutes after I left at the end of my shift. I had walked through the same building, passed the same aisles, and stepped outside believing it had been another ordinary day. By the time I was leaving the parking lot, or possibly before I had even made it that far, one man was attacking another inside the store. I had spent many hours working in that grocery store, so the place had become familiar in the way workplaces usually do. I knew the layout without needing to think about it. I knew where each aisle began, where the shelves were damaged, which freezer doors did not close properly, and which parts of the floor became crowded at certain times of day. I could walk through the store while thinking about something else and still know exactly where I was. Aisle 8 was part of the freezer section. It was lined with tall glass doors, bright lights, and rows of frozen food. The air there always felt colder than the rest of the store. The freezer motors made a steady humming sound behind the normal noise of shopping carts, conversations, announcements, and items being scanned at the registers. There was nothing special about aisle 8 before that day. Customers walked through it looking for frozen meals, vegetables, ice cream, or whatever else they needed. Employees passed through while helping people or returning products to the shelves. It was an ordinary part of an ordinary grocery store. After the murder, nobody who worked there thought of it as ordinary again. From what I later learned, the situation started because one man made inappropriate comments about another man's 14-year-old daughter. I do not know the exact words he used, and I am glad I never heard them repeated in detail. Whatever he said was serious enough to anger the girl's father immediately. She was only 14. She was a child, and the man had crossed a line by speaking about her that way. The father did not attack him at once. That detail mattered. He became angry, but he continued shopping for a while. He stayed with his family and kept moving through the store. On the outside, the situation may have looked as if it had ended. The two men were no longer arguing, and nobody was fighting. Inside, however, the father was still thinking about what had been said. He stewed over it. People use that word when someone keeps replaying an insult or offense in their mind. Instead of the anger cooling down, it becomes stronger. The person remembers the words again and again, imagining what they should have said or done. That seemed to be what happened. The father finished shopping. He took his groceries and his family outside to the car. At that point, the safest thing would have been to leave. His family was with him, the shopping was done, and there was no longer any reason to stay near the man who had offended him. He could have driven home. He could have reported the comments to store management. He could have called the police if he believed the man had threatened or targeted his daughter. He could have protected his family by putting distance between them and the situation. Instead, he left them at the car and went back inside. That decision changed several lives. I often wondered what his family thought when he turned around. Perhaps he told them he needed to go back for something he had forgotten. Maybe they knew he was returning to confront the man. His wife or another relative may have tried to stop him. I do not know. What I know is that he walked back through the entrance alone. The grocery store was still operating normally. Customers continued pushing carts. Employees stocked shelves. The registers kept scanning items. Most people inside probably did not know that anything serious was about to happen. The father went looking for the man who had made the comments. He found him in or near aisle 8. He confronted him. The conversation became an argument, and the argument became physical. There may have been shouting first. One man may have stepped too close to the other. Someone may have pushed or grabbed someone. The people nearby might have turned to look without yet understanding how dangerous the situation was. Arguments happen in public places. Most end with people walking away, employees separating them, or police being called before anyone is seriously injured. This one did not. The father knocked the other man to the floor. At that point, the man was down. The immediate fight could have ended there. The father could have stepped away and waited for police or security. Instead, he began stomping on the man's head. The violence was not a single strike made during confusion. He forced the man down and continued attacking him while he was on the floor. He stomped the man's head against the hard surface of the grocery store aisle. A supermarket floor is made to handle heavy carts, dropped products, and thousands of people walking across it. It does not give way under impact. There is no softness to protect someone whose head is being driven against it. The man on the floor had nowhere to move. He may have tried to cover his face or protect his head with his arms. He may already have been unconscious after the first few blows. The father continued. People nearby must have screamed or shouted at him to stop. Someone may have tried to pull him away, while others were too frightened to move close. A person in that state can turn on anyone who interferes. Employees would have been trained to call management or emergency services, but very few grocery store workers are prepared to stop a man who is killing someone with his feet. The attack happened quickly. That is one of the worst things about violent deaths. They can begin and end before everyone nearby understands what they are seeing. A customer may hear shouting, turn into the aisle, and see a man on the floor. An employee may receive a call about a fight and arrive after the worst damage has already been done. Someone called the police. By then, the victim had suffered fatal injuries. I had left my shift only about 2 minutes earlier. When I thought about that later, I tried to remember my final moments inside the building. Had I passed either of the men? Had the father already taken his family outside? Was he returning through the entrance while I was leaving? It was possible we had crossed paths. I may have walked past him without noticing anything unusual. He may have looked angry or distracted, but that would not necessarily have attracted attention in a grocery store. Customers become upset for many reasons. They argue with family members, complain about prices, or become frustrated while waiting. There would have been no way for me to look at him and know that he was about to kill someone. Still, the timing bothered me. 2 minutes is almost nothing. I could have stopped to speak with a coworker. I could have stayed to finish one small task. I could have taken a little longer to clock out. Any of those things might have kept me in the store when the fight began. I might have heard the shouting. I might have seen the man knocked down. I might have watched the father stomp him to death. Instead, I left at exactly the right moment to miss it. I never knew whether to feel lucky or guilty about that. Logically, there was nothing I could have done. I was not trained to physically stop a violent attacker. Stepping between those men could have gotten me seriously injured or killed. But when something terrible happens only minutes after you leave, it is difficult not to think about the different ways the timing could have changed. After the assault, the father stopped. He did not run from the store or try to hide. He walked back outside. By then, people had called the police, and he knew officers were coming. His family was still waiting near the car. He went to them and said goodbye. He told them he was going away for a long time. That part of the story was almost as disturbing as the murder itself. He understood what he had done. The anger that had driven him back into the store had passed enough for him to recognize the consequences. He knew the man inside was dead or badly injured. He knew he would be arrested. He knew that whatever happened next, he would not be going home with his family. I imagined the people at the car watching him approach. Perhaps they had heard the commotion or seen customers running out. Maybe they did not yet know how serious it was. Then he told them he was leaving for a long time. His 14-year-old daughter had already been placed in a terrible position because of the inappropriate comments. Now she had to watch her father say goodbye after killing the man who made them. He may have believed he was defending her, but what he did also gave her a memory she would carry for the rest of her life. She lost whatever sense of safety she had that day. A stranger had spoken about her in a disgusting way, and then her father committed murder because of it. Instead of driving home with her family, she watched police arrive to arrest him. The father waited. He did not resist or attempt to leave. Perhaps he sat near the car. Maybe he stood with his hands visible as officers entered the parking lot. He knew they were coming for him. Inside the store, employees and customers were dealing with the man he had left on the floor. Someone may have tried first aid, though head injuries caused by repeated stomping can be impossible to treat outside a hospital. Paramedics would have arrived, checked the victim, and attempted whatever they could. The freezer section was turned into an emergency scene. Products remained behind the glass doors. Shopping carts were left in the aisle. Items people had planned to buy sat forgotten, while police officers marked off the area. A place designed for ordinary shopping became the location of a homicide investigation. The police arrested the father outside. He had already admitted to his family that he expected to be gone for a long time. There was no mystery about who attacked the man. There were witnesses, security cameras, and physical evidence. He was taken away. His groceries remained in the car. That small detail always stayed in my mind, even though I do not know what eventually happened to them. He had finished a normal family shopping trip. The bags were probably filled with food and household items they expected to use over the following days. Then he went back inside and destroyed the future he had planned. His family had to leave the parking lot without him. The victim's family would soon receive their own devastating call. Whatever the man had said was wrong, but his words did not give someone the legal or moral right to kill him. The father had other choices. He could have protected his daughter without committing murder. Instead, he allowed anger to decide everything. When I learned what happened, I had trouble connecting it to the store I knew. I kept picturing aisle 8 exactly as it had looked during my shift. Bright freezer lights, clean glass doors, cold air escaping whenever someone opened one, labels and prices under rows of frozen products. Then I imagined a man lying on the floor while another drove his head into it. The two images did not belong together, but from that day forward, they were connected. Employees who witnessed the murder had to speak with police. Customers were likely asked to remain for statements. Security footage would have been reviewed. The store may have closed for some time while investigators examined the aisle. They needed photographs, measurements, and evidence. The victim's blood had to be documented before professional cleaners could remove it. The workers on duty had expected to finish another normal shift. Instead, they became witnesses in a murder case. Some may have seen the entire attack. Others may have arrived after hearing the noise. A cashier might have seen the father walking outside after the murder, appearing calmer than anyone would expect. A supervisor may have been the person who called the police. Someone may have looked through the entrance and watched him saying goodbye to his family. Every witness carried a different part of the event. My part was the fact that I had just left. I did not see the blood or hear the impact. I did not watch the police place him in handcuffs, but I knew how close I had been. When I returned to work, the store looked mostly the same. Businesses cannot remain closed forever, even after someone dies inside them. The investigation ends, the area is cleaned, and customers eventually return. Aisle 8 reopened. The freezer doors were still there. The light still shone on the frozen food. The machines continued humming. To a customer who had not heard the story, there was nothing unusual about it. For the employees, it was different. They knew the exact part of the floor where the man had fallen. Even after the blood was removed, the space did not feel clean in the same way. Cleaning can remove physical evidence, but it cannot remove the knowledge of what happened. I imagine some workers avoided the aisle whenever possible. Others may have forced themselves to walk through it because they did not want the memory to control them. Customers probably asked questions after hearing the news. Was this where it happened? Which aisle? Were you working that day? People are curious about violent events, even when their questions make the people involved uncomfortable. The employees who witnessed it may not have wanted to describe it repeatedly. They had already given statements to police. They had already replayed the scene in their own minds. Still, the story became part of the store. New employees eventually heard about it. Someone would point toward the freezer section and say that a man had been killed there. The details may have changed slightly as people repeated them, but the basic sequence remained. A man made inappropriate comments about another man's 14-year-old daughter. The father became angry but finished shopping. He took his family and groceries to the car. Then he went back inside. He confronted the man. The fight became physical. He knocked him down and stomped his head against the floor until he died. Afterward, he went back outside, told his family goodbye, and waited for police. There was something especially cold about the change from violence to calm. During the attack, he had lost control or surrendered to his anger. Minutes later, he was able to stand with his family and explain what would happen next. That meant part of him already understood the result before he went back inside. He knew violence could lead to arrest. He knew his family could lose him. He still returned. Maybe he did not intend to kill the man when he entered the store. Perhaps he only planned to confront him or demand an apology. But once the man was on the ground, the father continued striking him. That was the point where anger became murder. He could have stopped. He did not. I thought about his daughter often. A parent's role is to protect a child. The man may have believed he was doing that when he confronted the person who spoke about her. But protection should not have meant forcing her to watch her father go to prison. The inappropriate comments may have lasted only a few seconds. The murder created consequences that lasted for years. The girl's name may have appeared in court records or news reports. People might have connected her to what happened, even though she had done nothing wrong. She may have blamed herself. Children and teenagers often take responsibility for events that adults caused. She might have thought that if she had not been there, if the man had not seen her, or if she had not told her father what was said, nobody would have died. That guilt would have been unfair, but it could still feel real. The responsibility belonged to the adults. One man chose to make inappropriate comments about a child. The other chose to respond with deadly violence. The daughter did not choose either action. The father's other family members were affected too. They left home that day expecting a grocery trip and returned without him. They had to explain what happened to relatives, employers, and possibly children who were too young to understand. They had to attend court hearings and hear the details discussed again. The victim's family had their own pain. The fact that he had said something disgusting did not make his death less real to the people who loved him. They still lost a son, brother, partner, father, or friend. They had to understand that his life ended on the floor of a grocery store. Violent events rarely create only one victim. The murdered man lost his life. The father lost his freedom. The daughter lost part of her family and possibly carried guilt she did not deserve. The witnesses lost their sense that ordinary public places were safe. The employees lost the ability to see aisle 8 as just another freezer aisle. I was affected more than I expected, even though I was not there for the attack. The 2-minute difference stayed with me. For a while, I thought about it whenever my shift ended. Leaving work had always been automatic. I clocked out, gathered my things, and walked outside. After the murder, I became more aware of how much could happen immediately after someone left. A normal moment did not always stay normal. I could walk through a door, and behind me a life could end. That realization was unsettling. It also made me think about how little we know about the people around us. I may have seen both men in the store without knowing anything about them. One had made offensive comments. The other was carrying enough anger to return and kill him. To everyone else, they were simply customers. Grocery stores bring strangers into the same space. People stand close together in aisles and checkout lines without knowing anything about each other's lives, fears, or tempers. Most interactions are harmless. Occasionally, one comment or argument becomes something far worse. There were probably many small moments when the situation could have ended differently. If the first man had kept his mouth shut, there would have been no confrontation. If the father had told an employee or security, someone could have removed the man. If the father had driven away after placing the groceries in the car, both men would have remained alive. If someone had stopped him before he returned inside, the murder might never have happened. If he had stopped after knocking the man down, the victim might have survived. But none of those things happened. The father made one decision after another, each taking him closer to the final act. He kept thinking about the comments. He left his family at the car. He went back inside. He found the man. He confronted him. He fought him. He knocked him down. Then he continued. By the time he walked outside to say goodbye, it was too late to reverse anything. The police could arrest him, but they could not return the victim to life. His apology, regret, or willingness to surrender could not change what happened in aisle 8. I do not know what sentence he eventually received. I only remember that he seemed to understand immediately that he was going away for a long time. That knowledge did not bring him peace. It only meant he had enough control after the murder to recognize what his anger had cost. The store continued operating for years, and people continued shopping in the freezer section. Products changed. Employees left and new ones were hired. The floor was cleaned thousands of times. Yet the story remained. Whenever someone mentioned aisle 8, people who had been there that day knew what was underneath the ordinary appearance. A man had died there because another man could not walk away. I missed it by 2 minutes. That fact was a small piece of luck I never asked for. I was grateful I did not witness the murder, but I also knew several coworkers were not as fortunate. They had to hear the blows, see the body, and watch the attacker leave. They could not simply clock out and forget it. Some may have dreamed about it for years. Some may have avoided the freezer aisle. Some may have left the job because the store no longer felt safe. For me, the worst image was not something I had actually seen. It was something I built from the details people told me. The father leaving his groceries and family in the parking lot, walking back through the automatic doors, finding the man in aisle 8, knocking him down, stomping his head into the hard floor, then walking back outside, calmer now, and telling his family goodbye. He knew he had ended one life and changed all of theirs. He stood there and waited while the police came to take him away. The freezer machines continued humming inside. The lights stayed on. The products remained behind the glass, and only 2 minutes earlier, I had walked out believing it had been a completely normal day. This happened to me around 15 years ago, when I was about 15 or 16 years old. It only happened once, and I have never experienced anything like it again. Even now, I still do not know exactly what caused it. It may have been some form of sleepwalking, a confused state between sleep and waking, or something else entirely. Whatever it was, it felt completely real at the time. The memory has become slightly unclear because so many years have passed, but the fear itself is still easy to remember. It happened one morning or early afternoon. I had been asleep in my bedroom and woke up very suddenly. I did not wake in the normal way, slowly becoming aware of the room and thinking about what time it was. I woke in an immediate state of panic. My body reacted before I understood what was happening. I jumped out of bed as though there were an emergency. The moment I opened my eyes, I believed my family had abandoned me. It was not only a passing worry that they had gone somewhere without telling me. I believed they were gone forever. In that moment, it felt as though my parents had packed everything important, driven away, and left me completely alone. There was no evidence for this belief. Nobody had told me they were leaving. There had been no argument or warning. My family had not threatened to abandon me. Under normal conditions, I would never have believed something like that simply because the house was quiet. But my mind was not working normally. I got out of bed and looked outside. Both of my parents' cars were gone. Seeing the empty spaces where the cars normally sat made the fear feel confirmed. Instead of thinking that they had gone to work, gone shopping, or left the house for some ordinary reason, my mind immediately accepted the worst explanation. They had left me. They were never coming back. I felt a level of fear and hopelessness that was completely out of proportion to what I was seeing, but at the time it did not feel unreasonable. It felt like a fact. The house was quiet. I was alone. The cars were gone. My family had abandoned me. Those thoughts repeated in my mind without any other explanation being able to enter. I started crying. It was not quiet crying. I became hysterical. I remember feeling terrified and completely helpless. The fear was not only about being alone in the house for a few hours. I believed my entire life had suddenly disappeared. My parents were gone. My family was gone. There was nobody coming back for me. At 15 or 16, I was old enough to remain home alone. Under normal conditions, an empty house would not have frightened me. I could make food, watch television, use the phone, and wait for someone to return. But in that state, none of those ordinary thoughts were available to me. I felt more like a very young child, who had suddenly been left in an unknown place. The longer I remained alone, the worse the fear became. Every quiet minute seemed to prove that nobody was returning. I kept expecting to hear a car pull into the driveway or a key turn in the door, but the house remained silent. Instead of slowly calming down, I became more hopeless. I cried for what may have been 10 or 15 minutes. It is difficult to know exactly how long because I was so disoriented. It could have been shorter or longer. I only remember that it felt like a significant amount of time. Nobody saw me in that condition. I was alone in the house, so there was no one nearby to tell me I had only just woken up or ask what was wrong. If another person had been there, perhaps hearing a familiar voice would have brought me back to reality sooner. Instead, I was trapped inside the belief my confused mind had created. I walked around crying and trying to understand what I was supposed to do. The strange part was that I also believed there was no way to contact anyone. That did not make sense, because we had a landline telephone in the house. I knew how to use it. I knew my mother's number, or at least had a way to call her. But the idea of simply picking up the phone and contacting her did not seem possible. It is difficult to explain because the thoughts were contradictory. Part of me knew phones existed. I could see the telephone in the house. I understood that people used phones to speak to one another. Yet another part of my mind believed I had been cut off from everyone and had no way to reach them. It was as though the ability to connect the object with its purpose had temporarily disappeared. I knew what a telephone was, but I could not fully understand that it solved the problem. That confusion is one of the most unsettling parts when I think back on it. If I had simply been frightened after a bad dream, I might have looked outside, seen the cars were gone, and called my mother. Instead, I began searching for some complicated way to contact her while a working telephone was already available. I turned on the television. I do not know why that seemed like the correct thing to do. I began looking through support pages or information connected to Sky TV. I think I was trying to find some method of contacting my mother through the television service. Even now, that behavior makes very little sense. There was no normal reason to believe a television support page would help me contact a family member. Sky TV customer support had nothing to do with finding my mother. But in my confused state, I believed there might be some kind of contact option hidden there. Maybe I thought the television could connect me to someone. Perhaps I was searching for a phone number without understanding that I already knew how to use the landline. The exact thought process is gone. I remember only the strong feeling that there was no direct way to reach my family and that I needed to find another route. I searched through the television information while still upset. By this point, the most intense crying may have slowed, but I was not fully calm or aware. I was still in a strange state between panic and confusion. I could move around the house. I could turn on the television. I could read or understand at least some of what was on the screen. I could make decisions, but those decisions were being built on a belief that made no sense. My family had abandoned me. They had taken away my ability to contact them. I needed to find some hidden method to reach my mother. At some point, I picked up the landline telephone. Even then, I still felt as though I had no way to contact her. That contradiction is hard to describe. I was holding the exact tool I needed, and I still felt cut off. Perhaps my brain had not fully returned to normal awareness. I may have been performing familiar actions automatically without properly understanding them. I dialed my mother's number. The phone rang. She answered. Hearing her voice did not immediately make me respond normally. Instead, I said something strange. I believe I asked, "Why did you take everything?" Those may not have been my exact words, but it was something close to that. I think I was trying to ask why she had removed every way for me to contact her. In my confused mind, the fact that I had struggled to understand the telephone meant she had somehow taken communication away from me. The question made no sense to her. She had not taken anything. The house was still there. The telephone was working. My belongings were still around me. She had only left the house for an ordinary reason. My mother became worried because I sounded confused and upset. She asked what I meant. She may have asked whether I was all right, whether I had just woken up, or what had happened. I do not remember every word she said. What I remember is the moment when she began speaking back to me. As I listened to her voice, something changed. It was as though my mind suddenly reconnected with reality. The belief that I had been abandoned began to disappear. I understood that my mother was not gone forever. She had answered the phone. She was speaking to me normally. My family had not left me. The cars were gone because my parents were away from the house, not because they had abandoned me. The landline was a normal telephone, and I had been able to call her the entire time. The panic began to break apart. I became aware of how strange my question sounded. I may not have fully understood what had happened, but I knew that the reality I had believed only moments earlier was no longer true. It felt like waking up for a second time. The first time, my body had left sleep, but my mind had remained trapped in something dreamlike. The second time happened while I was speaking to my mother. That was when I truly returned. Afterward, I felt embarrassed and confused. I had been crying hysterically over something that was not happening. I had searched television support pages for a way to contact someone while standing near a working phone. I had called my mother and asked why she had taken everything, even though nothing had been taken. From the outside, the behavior probably looked completely irrational. At the time, however, each part of it had felt necessary. That is what frightened me most once I was fully awake. I had not known I was confused. I did not think, my thoughts are strange right now. I believed them. My family's absence felt permanent. The hopelessness felt justified. The idea that I could not contact anyone felt true even while I was using a telephone. The mind normally checks thoughts against reality. If you wake up and see an empty driveway, you remember that people leave the house for ordinary reasons. If you feel alone, you call or message someone. If a thought makes no sense, another part of the mind questions it. During that episode, those checks did not seem to work. The fear arrived first and created the explanation afterward. I woke in panic, saw the cars were gone, and my mind decided I had been abandoned. Once that belief formed, everything else was interpreted through it. The quiet house became proof. The empty driveway became proof. The fact that nobody immediately came home became proof. Even my confusion about the phone became part of the story. It was as though my brain had written a nightmare and continued acting it out after my eyes opened. I have wondered many times whether it was some form of sleepwalking. I do not have a history of sleepwalking. As far as I know, I had never walked around the house while asleep before this happened, and I have never done it since. Still, sleepwalking does not always mean walking through the house with closed eyes. A person can sometimes appear awake, move around, speak, and perform actions while part of the brain remains asleep or confused. Maybe I woke during a stage of sleep when my awareness had not fully returned. Perhaps I had been dreaming that my family left me, and the dream continued after I stood up. I do not remember a dream before waking, but people do not always remember dreams. The belief may have come from something happening in my sleep. Another possibility is that I experienced a confused awakening. Sometimes people wake suddenly and remain disoriented for a short period. They may not know where they are or what is happening. Most confused awakenings probably last only a few seconds or minutes. Mine seemed to continue much longer. I was able to walk around, use the television, and call my mother. That makes it difficult for me to know what category the experience belongs in. I am not trying to diagnose it. I only know that I was not thinking like my normal awake self. The episode ended as quickly as it began. Once my mother's voice brought me back to reality, the strange belief did not continue for the rest of the day. I did not remain convinced she was hiding something. I did not keep believing my family planned to leave. I returned to normal thinking. That makes the event feel connected to sleep rather than a longer mental health problem, but I cannot know for certain. It happened only once. In all the years since, I have never woken up believing I had been abandoned. I have never searched television pages because I thought there was no phone. I have never experienced another period where familiar objects stopped making sense in that way. If it had happened repeatedly, I would probably have been much more concerned. Because it was a single event, it became one strange memory from my teenage years. Still, being unique does not make it less frightening. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if my mother had not answered. If the call had gone unanswered, would the panic have returned even more strongly? Would I have believed the unanswered phone proved she had left forever? Would I have run outside looking for my family? Could I have wandered away from the house while still confused? I do not know. At 15 or 16, I was old enough to leave the house alone. Nobody would have stopped me if I walked into the street in a panic. I might have gone to a neighbor, called emergency services, or traveled somewhere looking for my parents. I could have created a much more serious situation while acting on a belief that was not real. The fact that my mother answered may have ended the episode before it became dangerous. Her voice gave me something real and familiar. It contradicted the story my mind had created. She was not gone. She had not removed every way to contact her. She was simply somewhere else, answering a normal telephone call from her confused child. I also wonder what the experience was like for her. She probably expected an ordinary call. Instead, she heard me crying or speaking strangely and asking why she had taken everything. A parent hearing that question from a teenager would immediately worry. She may have wondered whether I had hit my head, taken something, become ill, or experienced some kind of breakdown. She was not inside the house and could not see me. All she had was my voice and a question that made no sense. Her calm response may have been more important than either of us realized. If she had become angry or frightened, I might have remained confused. Instead, she spoke to me, asked what was wrong, and helped my mind return to normal. The event also changed how I think about fear. Before this happened, I assumed terror always came from something outside you. A dangerous person, a fire, an accident, a real emergency. This fear came entirely from inside my own mind. The house was safe. My family had not abandoned me. The telephone worked. Nothing had been taken. Yet I felt absolute despair. The emotion was real even though the situation was not. That shows how powerful the mind can be. It does not always wait for proof before creating fear. If the brain believes something terrible is happening, the body responds as though it is true. My heart raced. I cried uncontrollably. I felt hopeless. I searched desperately for help. The body does not care whether the danger comes from reality, a dream, or confusion. It reacts to the belief. The memory makes me understand why people in altered or disoriented states can behave in ways that seem contradictory. From the outside, someone might say, "You believe there was no way to contact your mother, but you picked up the phone and called her." That does not make sense. They would be right. It does not make sense. But the confused mind does not always follow one clear line of logic. Different parts of understanding can work at the same time. One part of me knew how to dial a phone. Another part believed communication was impossible. One part could read television information. Another part believed my entire family had disappeared forever. I was able to perform normal actions without having a normal understanding of them. That contradiction is probably evidence of how disoriented I was. It was not a carefully formed belief. It was a dreamlike emotional state. The feeling came first, and the actions followed in whatever way my half-awake mind could manage. I have tried to remember whether anything stressful had happened around that time. Maybe I was worried about my family, school, or being left alone. Perhaps I had watched or read something about abandonment. I cannot connect the episode to any clear event. It seems to have appeared without warning. That makes it more mysterious. If I had been having repeated nightmares or going through a family crisis, the content would be easier to understand. Instead, I went to sleep normally and woke believing everyone I loved had left me. The age may have mattered. At 15 or 16, a person is partly independent but still deeply dependent on family. You may believe you are almost an adult, yet the idea of truly being abandoned is terrifying. My mind may have found one of the strongest fears available and made it feel real. I was old enough to understand what permanent loss meant, but young enough to feel completely helpless when imagining it. The empty driveway was the perfect image to support that fear. Both cars were gone. To my confused mind, that meant both parents were gone together. It was not one person going to work and another going shopping. They had left as a family without me. That may have been why the hopelessness felt so complete. I did not think they were delayed. I thought they had made a decision to disappear from my life. The question I asked my mother, "Why did you take everything?" also feels connected to that belief. Maybe I did not mean physical objects. Perhaps everything meant safety, family, communication, and the normal structure of my life. In that moment, it felt as though all of it had been removed. I could not express that clearly, so the thought came out as a strange sentence. My mother heard a confusing question. Inside my mind, I may have been asking, "Why did you leave me with nothing and no way to reach you?" Once I returned to normal awareness, the sentence sounded ridiculous, but it may have been the closest language I had for the panic. The event seems almost silly when explained quickly. A teenager woke up, saw the family cars were gone, cried, and called their mother. There was no intruder, no disappearance, and no real emergency. But the emotional experience was not silly. For 10 or 15 minutes, I believed I had lost everyone. There was no comfort inside that belief, no plan for what came next. Only the feeling that I had been left alone permanently. That is one of the worst emotions I can remember from that age. The terror also came from the suddenness. There was no time to prepare. I did not receive bad news and slowly react to it. I woke already inside the fear. My body was moving before I could ask whether the thought was reasonable. In a normal nightmare, waking ends the danger. You open your eyes, recognize your bedroom, and feel relief. This time, waking did not end it. The nightmare followed me into the house. It used real details, like the empty driveway and quiet rooms, to keep itself alive. Only my mother's voice finally broke it. That is why I sometimes describe the moment on the phone as returning to reality. I had been awake physically, but the world I was reacting to was not the real one. Her voice pulled the two worlds apart. In one world, my family had abandoned me and removed every way to reach them. In the real world, my mother had left the house for an ordinary reason and was available by telephone. The real world returned in the middle of the conversation. I cannot remember whether I explained everything to her immediately. I may have struggled to describe what had happened because I was still embarrassed and confused. How do you explain that you forgot the meaning of a telephone while using one? How do you tell someone you believed they had disappeared forever only because their car was gone? The experience did not fit normal language. Even now, I have trouble explaining it without sounding as though I am leaving out an important detail. There was no hidden reason for the panic that I know of. No fight, no threat, no real abandonment. Only a sudden, powerful belief after waking. Over the years, the details have faded. I cannot say whether it was exactly morning or afternoon. I cannot remember precisely how long I cried. I do not remember every page I looked at on the television or every word spoken during the phone call. But the main sequence remains clear. I woke in panic. I thought my family had abandoned me forever. I saw both cars were gone. I cried alone for around 10 or 15 minutes. I believed there was no way to contact anyone. I searched Sky TV support information for some way to reach my mother. I picked up the landline while still believing communication was impossible. I called her. I asked something like, "Why did you take everything?" She spoke to me. Reality returned. The episode ended. There was no second event later that week or month. Nothing similar happened during adulthood. It remains an isolated break in an otherwise normal history of waking and sleeping. That makes me think it was probably related to sleep, but probably is the most certain answer I have. Maybe my mind woke in the wrong order. Perhaps the part responsible for movement and speech became active before the part responsible for reasoning and recognizing reality. Maybe the emotional content of a dream remained while the dream itself disappeared from memory. I cannot prove any of those ideas. I only know that something interrupted the normal boundary between sleep and waking. For a short time, I was able to move through the real world while reacting to something unreal. That thought still unsettles me. We trust waking up to restore control. We trust our memories, surroundings, and familiar objects. I woke in my own bedroom, inside my own home, surrounded by things I knew. Yet none of that prevented my mind from building a false emergency. It makes me wonder how fragile normal awareness can be. Most mornings, the brain connects everything instantly. This is my room. That is the window. My parents are out. The phone can reach them. I am safe. On that day, those connections failed. The room was familiar, but safety was gone. The cars were absent, so my family was gone forever. The phone existed, but I believed there was no way to call. The television became a strange place to search for help. Then one familiar voice repaired the connections. I do not think about the incident constantly. It did not leave me afraid to sleep every night. It became one of those memories that returns when people discuss sleepwalking, night terrors, confused awakenings, or strange things the brain can do. Each time I realize how difficult it is to describe an experience that did not follow normal logic. People naturally look for reasons. Why did you think they abandoned you? Why did you not simply call? Why did you search the television? Why did you say they took everything? I do not have satisfying answers. The reason for each action was the same. I was not fully myself. My body was awake enough to move, but my mind was still somewhere else. Perhaps that is all the explanation there is. The story does not end with a diagnosis or a clear discovery. There was no medical test afterward that explained it. It never happened again, so there was no pattern to study. I returned to normal and continued living my life, but for those few minutes, I experienced what it felt like to lose trust in reality without knowing I had lost it. That is the part that stays with me. I did not stand outside my own confusion and observe it. I lived inside it. I believed it. The hopelessness was real. The tears were real. The fear of abandonment was real. Only the event causing them was not. When my mother answered, her voice became proof that the world had not ended. She had not taken everything. She had not left me forever. I had never truly been cut off from anyone. I had only woken up in a state where my mind could not understand that yet. It may sound silly now. At the time, I was absolutely terrified. I still remember one evening when I was returning home and saw a group of strange lights moving across the sky. This happened in Eastern Europe sometime around 1997 or 1998. I cannot remember the exact date, but I remember the experience clearly because I had never seen anything move like that before, and I have never been completely able to explain it. It was a clear night. The sky was dark and full of stars, with no heavy clouds blocking the view. I was not drunk, under the influence of anything, or half asleep. I was simply heading home and happened to look up at the right moment. At first, I noticed a few lights in the sky. They did not immediately look frightening. They were only points of light, and there are many normal things that can create lights in the night sky. Planes, helicopters, satellites, and even distant towers can look unusual if you see them from the wrong angle. But these lights were moving. There was more than one of them, and they seemed to be traveling together in the same general direction. I stopped and watched. The first thing that made them seem strange was that they were not moving in a simple, straight line like a normal passenger plane. When you see a plane flying at night, its path is usually easy to follow. It moves steadily in one direction and at a fairly constant speed. You may see blinking navigation lights, and if it is close enough, you may hear the engines. These lights were different. They moved in the same general direction, but their paths did not appear perfectly straight. They seemed to shift slightly around one another, almost as if they were moving as a group instead of being parts of one solid aircraft. Some looked as though they moved forward while others changed position. The group did not stay in one neat formation. The lights appeared random, but they were still connected in some way because they all continued traveling toward the same area of the sky. I watched closely, trying to understand what I was seeing. There was no obvious body around the lights. I could not see the shape of an aircraft between them. There was no dark outline blocking the stars that would suggest one huge vehicle with several lights attached to it. They looked like separate objects. Of course, distance can be difficult to judge at night. Something close and small can look like something large and far away. Several lights on one aircraft can also appear separated if the main body is dark. I knew that even then, but the way they moved did not match anything familiar to me. The sky was clear enough that I could compare the lights with the stars around them. The stars remained fixed while the group moved steadily across the sky. That told me they were not stars or something caused by my eyes. I looked away briefly and then looked back. The lights were still there. Sometimes, if you stare at a bright point for too long, your eyes can create strange movements or afterimages. I wanted to make sure that was not happening, but when I looked again, the group had continued traveling. They were real lights in the sky. I listened for sound. I do not remember hearing anything. There was no clear engine noise, no loud helicopter sound, and no sharp noise from a fast military aircraft. That does not mean they were silent. They may have been too far away for sound to reach me clearly. Wind, buildings, and normal evening noise could also have hidden it. Still, the lack of any obvious sound made the sight feel more unusual. I kept watching until they moved farther away. I do not remember them suddenly shooting upward or disappearing in a flash. They simply continued moving until I could no longer see them clearly. The whole event may only have lasted a few minutes, but it stayed in my mind. Afterward, I tried to think of normal explanations. Planes were the obvious first possibility. Maybe I had seen several aircraft flying together. Military planes sometimes travel in formation. and Eastern Europe in the late 1990s was a place where military activity would not have been impossible. But the lights did not look like planes to me. They were not arranged in a normal formation, and they did not seem to follow perfectly straight paths. I also did not see the usual blinking lights I associated with aircraft. Helicopters were another possibility. Several helicopters could move together and change their positions slightly. At night, their lights might appear to float or move in ways that looked strange from the ground. But helicopters are usually loud, especially when there is a group of them. I did not hear the heavy beating sound of rotors. Again, they may have been far away, so sound alone cannot rule anything out. Flares were another possible explanation. Military flares can appear as bright lights in the sky. They can move, slowly descend, or look as though they are floating. Several flares released together can create a group of lights that seems mysterious. The problem was that these lights appeared to travel together in one direction, instead of simply falling or fading. They did not seem to hang in one place, they moved across the sky. Satellites can also look like lights moving among the stars, but satellites normally travel in straight lines. A group of satellites can create several lights moving in the same direction. But in 1997 or 1998, I had never seen anything like the large satellite groups people sometimes see today. Even now, satellite groups usually look more organized, often like a straight line or a chain. What I saw seemed less controlled and less even. The lights moved in the same general direction, but not in one perfect line. Years later, people suggested drones. Today, drones would be one of the first explanations people offered. Groups of drones can fly together, change formation, and carry bright lights. But this happened around 1997 or 1998. Drones existed in some military and technical form at the time, but they were not the common consumer devices people see everywhere today. I certainly had never seen one, and I do not know whether a group of them would have been flying over that part of Eastern Europe. Maybe they were some kind of military technology. Maybe there were aircraft or unmanned devices that ordinary people did not know about. It is possible. I cannot prove there were no drones, experimental planes, or classified equipment in the area. That is part of the problem. There are many possible explanations, but none of them fit perfectly enough to make me certain. Some people become very focused on the meaning of the term UFO. They explain that it only means unidentified flying object and does not automatically mean aliens. I understand that. That was never the point. The point is that I saw something in the sky that I could not identify, and part of me still wonders whether it was something truly unusual. I am not claiming that I saw aliens. I did not see a metal saucer hovering above me. I did not see windows, figures, or beams of light. Nothing landed. There was no missing time, strange mark, or message. I only saw a group of lights moving in a way I could not explain. But sometimes a simple, unexplained event can remain more powerful than a dramatic story. If I had seen something obviously shaped like a plane, I would have forgotten it. If the lights had moved in a normal straight line, I would have assumed they were satellites. If they had slowly fallen, I would have believed they were flares. Instead, they moved together, but not quite together, in the same direction but not in a simple line. That difference kept the memory alive. I also remember how normal everything else felt. The night was calm. I was returning home. There was no reason to expect anything unusual. I was not standing in a place known for strange sightings or searching the sky with binoculars. I simply looked up. That makes me trust the memory more because I was not trying to see something mysterious. I had no reason to turn ordinary lights into a story. At the same time, memory is not perfect. This happened many years ago, and details can change with time. The movement may have seemed more unusual than it really was. The lights may have been farther apart or closer together than I remember. Perhaps I connected separate aircraft into one group because they happened to be traveling in the same direction. I have considered that. Maybe there was a simple explanation that would have been obvious to an air traffic controller, pilot, or military officer. But I did not have that knowledge. To me, standing there beneath the clear night sky, the lights looked unlike anything I knew. The strange part was not only the sight itself, it was the feeling it created. When you look at the night sky, you normally feel that the stars are distant and still. Planes are familiar because they follow known paths and make known sounds. These lights did not fit either group. They were not fixed like stars, and they were not familiar like planes. For those few minutes, the sky felt less predictable. I felt small standing beneath it. There was a sense that something was happening above me that I could see but not understand. That feeling is difficult to explain without sounding dramatic. I was not exactly terrified. The lights did not come toward me, and I had no reason to believe I was in danger. But I was deeply unsettled. I kept watching because I wanted an answer. I expected the group to change direction, reveal itself as an aircraft, or do something that made the explanation clear. It never did. The lights simply continued until they disappeared from view. When I reached home, I probably told someone what I had seen or kept replaying it in my mind. I may have looked for reports afterward, though information was not as easy to find in the late 1990s as it is now. There was no smartphone in my hand. I could not immediately record a video, check flight tracking, search local social media, or compare what I saw with thousands of other reports. If I wanted proof, I would have needed a camera ready at exactly the right moment. I had none. All I was left with was my memory. That is another reason old sightings are difficult to discuss. Today, almost everyone carries a camera. If strange lights appear, people can record them from several angles. Others can check aircraft routes, satellite paths, weather conditions, and military activity. Back then, a person could see something unusual and have no way to prove it. By the time you told anyone, the lights were gone. People either believed you or did not. I did not want to become someone who insisted they had seen aliens and rejected every normal explanation. I still do not. There probably is a normal explanation. There usually is. Maybe it was a formation of military aircraft seen from a strange angle. Maybe it was a group of helicopters too far away to hear. Maybe atmospheric conditions made the lights appear to move differently. Maybe they were flares carried sideways by wind. Maybe they were experimental drones or another kind of equipment. I cannot eliminate those possibilities, but none of them gives me the feeling of a complete answer. The movement is what I keep returning to. They did not seem connected like lights on one object. They did not stay evenly spaced like aircraft flying in formation. They seemed independent, almost random, but all were traveling in the same broad direction. Sometimes one appeared to shift relative to another. That made the group feel alive in a strange way, as though each light had its own movement but followed a shared course. It is possible this was only perspective. Objects at different distances can seem to move strangely when seen against the stars. One aircraft may appear faster than another. A turn can look like sideways movement. Lights can disappear when the angle changes and then reappear. Human vision is not perfect, especially at night. Our brains try to turn points of light into shapes and patterns. I know all of that. Yet knowing the limits of vision has never completely removed the feeling that I witnessed something unusual. Part of me still thinks they may have been actual UFOs in the way most people use that word, not just objects I personally failed to identify. I do not mean I am certain they came from another planet. I mean, I wonder whether they were something outside ordinary public knowledge. They could have been advanced military craft. They could have been a rare atmospheric event. Or they could have been something no normal explanation fully covers. The possibility remains open because I never learned the answer. Over the years, I have heard many UFO stories. Some are clearly mistakes. A bright planet can look strange near the horizon. Lanterns can move together in the wind. Satellite trains can frighten people who have never seen them. Aircraft lights can create unusual shapes. Weather balloons, flares, and reflections explain many sightings. Other stories are harder to dismiss. Pilots, military staff, and groups of witnesses sometimes report objects that move in unusual ways. That does not prove alien life, but it shows that unexplained things are still seen. My experience was much simpler than those famous cases. There was no radar record that I knew of, no government investigation, no large crowd making reports. It was only me looking up on a clear night in Eastern Europe around 1997 or 1998. Maybe other people saw the same thing. I have no idea. Perhaps someone in another town watched the lights and assumed they were planes. Maybe a military unit knew exactly what was flying overhead. Perhaps the event was reported somewhere I never found. It is strange to think that the answer may have existed at the time, but never reached me. A pilot might have known. An officer at an airfield might have watched the same group on radar. Someone may have launched the objects and considered the flight routine. Meanwhile, I stood below wondering whether I was looking at something from another world. That difference between knowledge and mystery can depend entirely on where a person is standing. For the person controlling an aircraft, it is only equipment. For the person on the ground, it becomes a lifelong question. The late 1990s were also a different technological period. People now look back and say drones may have existed, but the word did not mean what it does today to most ordinary people. There were no common small camera drones flying over parks and houses. Light shows made from hundreds of drones were not normal public entertainment. If I saw the same pattern today, I would immediately consider drones. Back then, that explanation would not have entered my mind. That does not make it impossible. Military technology often exists long before the public sees common versions of it. Eastern Europe had military bases, changing borders, political tension, and many kinds of aircraft. A secret or experimental flight is possible. But saying maybe drones only replaces one unknown with another. What kind of drones? Who was operating them? Why were they flying together at night? Why did they move the way they did? Without those answers, the site remains unidentified to me. Some people seem uncomfortable with leaving a mystery open. They need to say either it was definitely aliens or it was obviously something normal. I do not feel able to choose either extreme. I know what I saw, but I do not know what caused it. That is the honest answer. The lights were real. They moved across a clear, star-filled sky. There was a group of them. Their movement did not look like an ordinary plane. I was sober and awake. Beyond that, I cannot be certain. I think the event stayed with me because it showed how much can exist beyond immediate understanding. People often feel that the world is fully mapped and explained. We have names for weather, aircraft, planets, and stars. Then something appears that does not match the categories in our minds. For a few minutes, certainty disappears. Even if the final explanation is ordinary, the experience of not knowing is powerful. I remember watching until the last visible light was gone. The sky returned to normal afterward. The stars remained exactly where they had been. Nothing else unusual appeared. I continued home. Life moved on. But the moment became fixed in my memory. Sometimes I think about how much easier the answer would be if I had recorded it. A clear video could show speed, direction, spacing, and changes in movement. Experts might identify the objects. They might say they were aircraft, flares, satellites, or something else. Or the video might only create more questions. Many recordings of strange lights are too dark, shaky, and distant to prove anything. A phone camera may not have helped as much as I imagined. Still, I wish I had some evidence beyond my own description. Without it, the story depends on trust. People can say I misunderstood what I saw. They can say memory has changed it. They may be right about some details. But I know the basic experience happened. I looked up and saw several moving lights. They traveled together in an unusual way. I could not identify them then, and I still cannot identify them now. That is all a UFO sighting needs to be. The problem is that saying UFO makes many people stop listening to the actual description. Some immediately imagine aliens and reject the story. Others begin explaining the abbreviation as though the person who used it does not know what it means. That misses the point. The mystery is not in the letters. The mystery is in the sky. I saw something I could not explain. I still want to know what it was. The label does not answer the question. Perhaps one day I will see a video of military lights or drones moving in exactly the same way, and the whole memory will suddenly make sense. I might recognize the pattern and think, that was it. I would probably feel relieved, but maybe also slightly disappointed. A normal explanation would close a question I have carried for years. Until then, the possibilities remain. I do not spend every day thinking about it. It did not take over my life or make me believe every strange event was connected to aliens. It is simply one memory that returns whenever people discuss unusual things in the sky. I listen to their stories and compare them with mine. Was the movement similar? Were the lights silent? Did they stay in formation? Did they disappear suddenly? Most accounts are different. Mine remains simple. A clear night, a sky full of stars, a group of random lights moving together in one direction, but not in a straight, plane-like path. No clear sound, no explanation. Sometimes the simplest stories are the hardest to solve because they contain so little evidence. There were no close details that could identify a machine, only distant lights and movement. The lack of detail prevents certainty in both directions. I cannot prove they were something extraordinary. Nobody else can confidently prove what they were without more information. So the memory stays exactly where it has always been. Somewhere between a normal sighting I misunderstood and a genuine encounter with something unknown. I still picture the night when I think about it. The dark sky was clear enough to see many stars. Then, among those fixed lights, a separate group crossed the darkness. They did not move like one plane. They did not seem to fall like flares. They did not form a perfect line. They shifted and traveled together until distance swallowed them. I stood there watching, trying to give them a name. More than 20 years later, I still do not have one. Maybe they were military aircraft. Maybe they were experimental drones. Maybe they were some kind of natural or atmospheric effect. Maybe there is another simple explanation I have never considered. Or maybe I really did witness something that did not belong to any normal category I knew. I am not claiming to have proof of alien visitors. I am only saying that on one clear evening in Eastern Europe around 1997 or 1998, I saw a group of unidentified lights moving across the sky in a way I had never seen before. They were there. I watched them. Then they were gone. Whatever they were, the question has remained much longer than the lights did.